The Watcher is a Netflix top 10 show that, spoiler alert, is being renewed for a second season despite a large portion of people not enjoying it. I, for one, did enjoy it, which is why we're taking a little journey through the season to answer the question, who is the Watcher? The Brannick family, Nora, Dean, Ellie, and Carter, arrive at 657 Boulevard to attend an open house. They meet the neighbors while they're there. Pearl and Jasper Winslow are in the house, and it turns out Jasper is obsessed with the dumbwaiter, which, if you didn't know what a dumbwaiter is something that delivers food kind of like a mini elevator to different floors of the house. They also encounter more strange characters and see the neighbors of the house, Mitch and Mo, sitting across the street staring at them. It turns out Karen, the realtor showing the house, is an old friend of Nora. On top of this, Dean is obsessed with the house already and decides they're going to buy it. So Dean takes out almost all of the family's savings and drains their retirement accounts in order to be able to purchase the home, and boom, they move in. The following morning, Jasper shows up in their house and delivers them their newspaper. They also get the first letter from the Watcher, who says some weird stuff about Ellie and Carter. So Nora and Dean go down to the police station to meet with Detective Chamberlain, who believes the whole thing is a prank, but in order to appease them, sends the letter off for DNA testing. It's also odd that he indicates that he knows how deep they had to dig to afford the house. Later that day, Dean has a tense interaction with Mitch and Mo, who are harvesting wild arugula on his side of the fence. The result of this is Mo ends up kind of threatening him, saying that they'll be watching them, but not for the right reasons. Nora has her first of many outings out with Karen at the country club, where Karen plants the seeds of doubt about Nora and Dean's relationship. The next morning, Carter finds Jasper, their neighbor, in the home's dumbwaiter. Dean throws Jasper right out of the house, and Pearl, Jasper's sister, explains that the old owners were okay with Jasper using the dumbwaiter. Dean and Nora decide to install a security system and hire a 19-year-old entrepreneur, Dakota, to do so. Later that night, we see Carter's pet ferret snatched up in the house, and in the morning, the ferret ends up dead. A few mornings later, Dean finds another Watcher letter in the mail. So, who is the Watcher? Pearl is actually the head of the Historic Preservation Society, so she has a vested interest in preserving the house as is, and with the Brannicks planning to renovate the house, she has motive to try and get them out of the house as quickly as possible. Jasper, Pearl's brother, seems pretty innocent, but he's been able to get in the house now twice since they moved in. And the Brannicks are already off to a bad start with Mitch and Mo, and Mitch and Mo told them that they'll be watching them. Dean and Nora bring the second letter to Detective Chamberlain, who suggests hiring a private detective, so Dean employs Theodora Birch, an alcoholic turned true crime detective. Nora finds a motel for her and the kids to sleep in, and Dean stays at the house. The first night, the doorbell rings, but when Dean opens the door, there's no one there. Dean also hears music playing from upstairs. At the motel, Nora gets a phone call and hears heavy breathing. After calling the number back, it's shown that the call came from inside the house. The next day, Nora and Karen meet up at the country club, where Karen tells Nora she should sell the house because of the letters. She offers to be the realtor as well. When Nora inquires about the other offers that were on the house when they bought it, Karen says that the other offer on the house was a lowball offer from an LLC. Later, Theodora gives Dean the contact information of Andrew Pierce, a previous owner of the house. Dean meets with Andrew, who tells him his son Caleb went to their neighbors Mitch and Mo's house and saw them in cloaks drinking baby blood while living there. Andrew also received Watcher letters shortly after and believes Mitch and Mo are the perpetrators. He also says that Jasper is harmless. Dean and Nora hire Dakota as a security guard to watch the family at night. But one night at the motel, Dakota and Ellie end up kind of getting together. Dean has a confrontation with Mo after Pearl called Mo to tell her about the renovations they were doing that morning. Later that evening, evening, Dean wakes up to gunshots. And the following morning, the police find out that Mitch and Mo are dead in their home. So who could be the Watcher at this point? Pearl and Jasper don't seem like they would be the Watcher, although Pearl is kind of working with Mo to try to make sure that Dean doesn't change the house at all. After talking to Andrew, Jasper seems like much less of a possibility. Mitch and Mo, on the other hand, have been all but confirmed by Andrew to be the Watchers, except for they were just killed in their home. So if they are the Watchers, the Watcher is now dead. And Karen, she's going to be added to this list because she just sold the Brannocks the house, and now she's trying to convince Nora to sell the house at a loss and have her be the realtor. Dean continues to discuss the case with Theodora. Karen and Nora again get together at the country club where Karen continues to try to break up her and Dean's marriage. Karen also suggests that the couple should have more sex. Dean is back at the house and meets a man named John who claims to be the building inspector. Their conversation gets weird and John indicates that he noticed Ellie and Dakota getting frisky. Afterwards, Dean learns from the contractors working on his house that there's no building inspector in the area named John. Nora listens to Karen's advice and tries to get sexy with Dean, but he's too distracted because of what's going on around the house. Dean meets up with Theodora because she's got some big news. She asked Chamberlain if she could look at old files about the house. Doing so, she finds out that John Graff, a previous owner of the house, killed his family in the house and drained their blood, and the crime scene was discovered by Jasper. And John Graff also received letters from the Watcher. Apparently, after John Graff's family was massacred, he disappeared and couldn't be found because he cut his face out of every single picture he was in. Listening to her story, Dean thinks about a man named John who was impersonating the building inspector, and he's thinking John could be John Graff. And since Jasper Winslow was the one who discovered the bodies, Dean wants to confront him about the case. But Pearl will not allow it. The episode ends with them receiving another letter from the Watcher. So who is the Watcher? Pearl is still on this list, but others are kind of drawing more attention, although she did cover for Jasper. Jasper honestly still seems like an unlikely candidate, though. He had to go to rehab after happening upon the crime scene, and also him discovering the crime scene could explain why he was a selective mute for years and years. And it's all but confirmed that Mitch and Mo cannot be the Watcher because the Brannocks received another letter after Mitch and Mo were murdered. Karen still shows up on this list because she's really trying to get Nora to sell the house, although multiple previous owners have received letters from the Watcher, and we don't know when Karen entered the scene. John Graff rises to the top suspect for being the Watcher. He may be part of the blood cult as he did drain the family's blood. He also showed up at the house, and if you remember, John Graff was standing in the house looking out at the Brannocks when they first came to see the house. The slight pushback on John Graff being the Watcher is that Theodora found out that he also received Watcher letters. Dean and Nora confront the director of the real estate agency they bought the house from. They laid out all the evidence they'd been collecting, and the director said he had no knowledge of any of it, and he's been playing by the rules, so the house is their problem. Dean tells Nora and Theodora about the man called John he met earlier. However, Theodora doesn't see the connection and believes Dakota, who's dating Ellie, might be the Watcher because she did a little reconnaissance on him and found out that his gamer tag is the Watcher. While Dakota's over at the house for the security system, Dean confronts Ellie and Dakota about them being an item and accuses Dakota of being the Watcher. Dakota agrees to send a sample of his DNA for testing to see if it matches the DNA on the Watcher envelopes. Karen continues to work on breaking up Nora and Dean and continues to try to get Nora to sell the house. Dean finds out that Dakota installed a camera in the bedroom of the house, and there's a film of him sleeping with a girl walking around the bed and laying next to him. The girl looks like Pat Graff, the daughter of John Graff. Dakota reveals he sent the footage to Nora and Dean's boss and placed the camera in Dean's bedroom because he thought Dean was the watcher. Nora ends up seeing the footage and kicks Dean out of the house. Dean goes and stays at the motel that the family was staying at, and while he's there, he sees a commercial with Andrew Pierce in it, the previous owner of the house who told him the story about the blood cult. Dean decides to drive to the house and post up so that he can watch the house and make sure his family's okay. While he's there, he sees a car dropping off Mitch and Mo. So, who is the watcher? Well, Pearl is probably around the same status as last time. Not the most suspect, but we still don't trust her. Mitch and Mo actually turn out to be alive, so they're back up at the top of the list. They could have sent the previous letter. Karen, she really seems like she may be the watcher, using the fear of the watcher and a possible LLC to rinse and repeat on the house. And John Graff, turns out he is still a big maybe. And with the footage of a girl who looks like his dead daughter being in the house, raises even more questions. Another person we're adding to this list for this episode is Dakota. His gamer tag, after all, is the Watcher. He also actively seems to be trying to work against Dean, although he did actually accuse Dean of possibly being the Watcher. While going through phone records, Nora discovers the unknown motel call came from their house, something we already know. So she tells Theodora that she thinks the Watcher might be Dean. Theodora hires a handwriting specialist to examine the letters and believes Dean is the Watcher. Theodora also discovers that Dean didn't make partner by investigating at his firm and also cashed out everything to get the loan to pay for the house. Karen goes and visits Mitch and Mo, where she discovers that Mitch and Mo's son brought older people into the house that looked like Mitch and Mo and killed them in order to collect the life insurance money. Karen then tries to convince them to sell the house because now it's stigmatized because two people were killed in it, and says she could buy the house with an LLC. She also says the real prize is across the street, the Brannick's house, and that she gets what she wants. Dean hunts down Andrew and confronts him about being an actor because he assumes that Andrew was maybe paid to tell him everything that he told him about the house. Andrew says everything he told Dean was the truth. Nora books another show and is again encouraged to ditch Dean by the show organizer. Pearl invites Nora to a luncheon to welcome Mo back, and at the luncheon, Mo tells Nora her son faked Mitch and Mo's death for insurance money. Pearl also believes Jasper wrote the Watcher letters to the Brannecks because she received a letter years ago called Ode to a House. She thinks that Jasper was trying to get her to not make any renovations to their house. While at the get-together, Nora hears thudding coming from somewhere in Pearl's house, and when Nora asks about it, Pearl and Mo brush it off like it's nothing. Dakota meets up with Dean and tells Dean that he discovered the girl never entered the home in any of the footage, and Dean tells Nora he wrote the third letter. Dean and Nora suspect the DNA results should already be in, and it turns out that they have come back and have just been sitting around. The results show that it's a woman's DNA on the envelope. Karen tells Nora that an LLC wants to buy Nora's house, but Nora rejects the offer. Nora and Dean discover Chamberlain and Karen together at the country club, and they confront them because they think the two of them are working together to try to get the house for cheap. Ellie discovers Ode to a House is a school assignment created by Roger Kaplan where students wrote a love letter to their favorite house. Nora remembers Kaplan from the open house. And the episode ends with the contract workers finding a tunnel in the basement which Nora and Dean explore and see someone running away from them. So, who is the Watcher? It almost seems like Pearl and Mo are colluding, and the DNA on the Watcher's envelope is female, so they seem extremely suspicious. Mitch and Mo are actually alive and could be working with Pearl. Pearl and Jasper. Karen admitted to Mitch and Mo that she buys houses and flips them using LLCs, so she could very well be the Watcher, although the only people we know who are receiving letters now are the Brannocks, and it seems like Karen is maybe wanting to buy multiple properties in the neighborhood. We don't get to see John Graff really in this episode, but he is still a big maybe. Dakota honestly seems like he's kind of turned it around and he's helping the Brannocks try to figure out who the girl in the security cam footage is. Also, the DNA came back as a woman's DNA on the envelope. Detective Chamberlain, he's been thwarting the Brannocks most of the time. They've been trying to figure out who the Watcher is, and he's dating Karen. They could both jointly own an LLC. He was also the one who suggested the special investigator and gave her a bunch of evidence on the house. So she could either be in his back pocket or he could be misleading her. And Roger Kaplan, the only things we really know about him is he was at the open house and he started this assignment called Ode to a House. And Pearl said she received a letter titled Ode to a House. Dean and Nora chase the mysterious figure through the tunnel and reach a bedroom where someone's been living. The person disappears behind a locked door, so Dean and Nora are unable to catch them. We get to see that this person is actually the person who Dean thinks is John Graff, and he is let into the door by Pearl. Dean and Nora go to Chamberlain, who refuses to help them after being confronted at the country club. Theodora decides to do some investigating and goes to Trish, Roger Kaplan's ex-wife, who tells her that Roger has been obsessed with the Brannocks' house ever since he was a little boy. He also loved another house, his childhood friend's house, who at this point has moved away and whose sister now lives there. And he sent letters to her, and after a while, the letters became more threatening. And he's the professor who started the Ode to a House assignment. Theodora tells Dean and Nora this information, and so they decide to confront Roger Kaplan. So they sit outside his house until he leaves and then confront him at the supermarket and accuse him of writing the Watcher letters. Roger brushes it off, but the next day, Roger is seen standing outside the Brannocks' home, taunting them and telling them he'll make their wish come true and watch them and make sure they are never accepted in town. Pearl and Jasper have a Preservation Society meeting with none other than the supposed John Graff. They talk about how they're keeping tabs on houses and making sure they're not being renovated. Dean confronts Pearl about the tunnels under the house and asks to see if there's an entrance to the tunnels in Pearl's house. She, of course, refuses. Later that night, Dean has a nightmare about Roger Kaplan killing his son in their house, and Dean and Nora finally agree that they need to sell the house. The Brannocks get a very large offer, but the buyer backs out after an article about the home is published. Karen tells Nora that she got the article published. And finally, the Brannocks move back to their old place in the city. So who is the Watcher? From our point of view, Pearl and the supposed John Graff are probably working together to terrorize the Brannocks for remodeling their house. And Pearl doesn't push back on there being a door to the tunnels underneath the houses when Dean comes and asks about them. Mitch and Mo again could be working with Pearl and Jasper. In this episode, Karen kind of takes a back seat with John Graff and Roger Kaplan now on the scene. We see the supposed John Graff running out of the tunnel into what we think is Pearl's house. He did also attend the Preservation Society meeting and described having a good method for checking in on houses. Dakota is almost completely off the radar. He came over to dinner and seems to be trying to help. Nothing has really changed with Detective Chamberlain, although him and Karen could still be working together. And Roger Kaplan could be playing things off very, very well. He could have been the one who's been writing the letters all along. At Nora's art show, her pieces end up selling very well. Dean is still obsessed with finding out who the Watcher is, and Nora tells Theodora, who's in the hospital due to her terminal cancer, about Dean's obsession. Another negative article is published about the house because it turns out Dean sent Watcher letters to their old neighbors, and Nora demands that he go apologize to them. Theodora later calls Dean to the hospital and tells him that she is the Watcher. And the Brannocks bought 657 Boulevard from her. She made up all of the evidence and wrote all of the letters in order to make them sell the house because she wanted to buy it back. Dean decides to go apologize to Mo about the Watcher letter and discovers that Mitch has passed away, and also finds out that Theodora may have lied about being the Watcher. When Dean and Nora go to Theodora's funeral, her daughter tells them Theodora lied about being the Watcher so Dean could be at peace. Nora and Dean receive an offer from an LLC, and they decide to sell the house. Pearl hosts the largest preservation society meeting that we've been able to see yet, where Jasper, Mo, John Graff, whose name is actually William Webster or Bill Webster, and Roger Kaplan are all in attendance. Roger Kaplan says that he recognizes Bill, but Pearl says it must be from the local library because that's where Bill works. But then Roger says he thinks he knows where he recognizes Bill from, and then asks him how his family's doing, and all of a sudden Jasper incessantly hits a gavel on the table. We find out that Karen was ultimately behind the LLC, and Nora visits Karen when she moves in, telling her that she will be watching. Late at night, Karen calls Chamberlain because she's spooked by the house, and we find out that her and Chamberlain broke up, and he's not willing to send anyone over to check on the house. She also finds a Watcher letter in the dumbwaiter and goes downstairs to find her dog dead and a mysterious figure watching her. A few weeks later, Dean is in therapy and tells his therapist that Karen sold the house. It's also apparent that he cannot let the house go, the very thing he's going to therapy for. He goes back to the home and meets the owner, introducing himself as John, the same name William Webster introduced himself as, and the same name as John Graff. When Nora calls him, he lies to her about where he is and drives away from the house, not knowing that Nora was at the house watching him the whole time. So, who do we think the Watcher is at the end of season 1? It seems like Pearl and William Webster, or Bill Webster, who might actually be John Graff, could be working together as the Watcher. Jasper seems like he might be helping them, but like I said, it doesn't seem like he's the actual mastermind behind all of this. It also makes sense for Pearl and Bill, or John, to keep Jasper close because he was the first one to witness John Graff's murder scene. It honestly seems like Mitch and Mo may be working with Pearl to watch the house. Karen ultimately ends up probably not being the Watcher, seeing as she bought the house and then sold it, and her dog was also killed in the house. Chamberlain and Karen broke up, but it could very well be that Chamberlain is working with someone else, possibly Pearl and the neighbors, or maybe Roger Kaplan, to spook people in the house. Roger Kaplan could very well be the Watcher, seeing as he recognizes that William Webster could actually be John Graff. Kaplan also asks Bill or John about his family, alluding to the fact that John Graff killed his family, implying that he knows that John Graff murdered his family and that he's been keeping tabs on the house all along. And the last person to add to this list are Dean and Nora, the previous owners of the house. It's very possible that many people who have moved out of the house now watch the house, but this wouldn't necessarily explain them being terrorized while living there. So ultimately, the first season has us guessing the entire time who the Watcher is. We keep thinking it's different people every single episode, and I think that's what makes this show so interesting. The show closes telling us that the case has not been solved. I honestly postulate in seasons to come they will resolve who the Watcher actually is, but the reason why a lot of people ended up not liking this show was because there was no resolution. They left us hanging. But I think that's one of the things about this show that's actually very fun. Most shows end up having a resolution, and this show, I think, did a good job leaving us on a cliffhanger. So ultimately, the answer to the question of who is the Watcher is we don't know.